Hi, this is for Veterans Only, and I'm Ray Keeton. This week we're in California at the headquarters of the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service. If you were ever in the military and stationed overseas, AFRTS is something that you'll probably remember very well. It was a touch of home to servicemen and women and also their dependents who were stationed at one of America's bases overseas in almost 60 countries. Well, AFRTS has come a long ways since its beginnings back in 1942 when it was born out of necessity. The early days of World War II, tough ones for the United States. Fighting in Europe was fierce, and in the Pacific, the U.S. was taking a beating. The morale of U.S. troops in both theaters was low. Sporadic mail deliveries from home helped, but still there was little timely and accurate information available to U.S. troops overseas on the progress of the war. While troops in Europe could at least listen to the BBC, those in the Pacific had nothing, except of course for Tokyo Rose, a less than reliable source of news and information. In May of 1942, however, U.S. troops around the world were thrown an information and entertainment lifeline, American Forces Radio.
In the South Pacific, of course, we start all these little stations, and then they would call themselves, typically American, the Mosquito Network, or the, wonderful. Right. And they were Americans, and asserting their own personalities, their own independence. If the AFRS was theirs, and it was also the enlisted man's,
Tom Lewis was drafted early in 1942 to set up and command the Armed Forces Radio Service. Its mission, quite simply, was to provide information and entertainment to U.S. troops overseas. According to Lewis, getting uncensored news and information to the enlisted man was the top priority.
The most important thing that he would get would be the news, undoctored news, so that he wouldn't hear a different thing from his family. And in this, that was the hardest thing to accomplish, absolutely hardest thing to accomplish.
The fight for uncensored news on AFRS was a tough battle, as was the appropriation of equipment and personnel, at a time when the nation was shifting into high gear in the production of guns, ships, and planes. He won both battles, though, and soon trained AFRS broadcasters began setting up operations where they were most needed.
We trained men to make the landings, so that from day one, they would have very crude and equipment, but they would have equipment to start a little radio station when they made the landing on that island.
So the seeds of Armed Forces Radio were planted, and in very little time began bearing fruit in the form of cooperation from the top stars and management of radio and the silver screen.
The GI Journal. It's the GI Journal. A lovely editor of your letters overseas, Linda Darnell.
Hello there, Kate. Tonight you're going to have a brand new editor for the letters from the men, because I'm leaving on a tour of Army camps overseas.
Oh, no fooling. Well, tell me, who's the new editor going to be?
Well, she's a very good friend of mine, and she's from MGM, and her name is Lucille Vault.
Hey,
what am I going to get, a kiss or a quart of milk?
Call from the United States of America. Stand by, Americans. Stand by, servicemen of the United Nations. Mail call salute your home state. Miss Dorothy Lamour. Command Performance USA, the greatest entertainers in America, as requested by you, the servicemen and women of the United States Armed Forces throughout the world.
You know, the weather down there is like it is here. Of course, they have a light sprinkle now and then. Light sprinkle, that's South Pacific. For man the boats, boys, the island disappeared again. Well, look, they got an armed guard around the state.
Oh, look at this.
Well, all right, Bob. Is your griddle hot?
Yeah, I think so. That's
That'll do, Bob. Now, the steak, please.
Oh, well, here it is, fellas. Beautiful.
A porterhouse steak 3 inches thick. The only one in captivity.
You gonna give that a hot foot?
Into the frying pan.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. There you are, fellas. That's the sound of a steak sizzling.
Fellas, that's the steak. That's not me sizzling. That's the steak.
And, fellas, I wish I could cook a big steak for each and every one of you.
The pool of talent available to Armed Forces Radio was seemingly endless. Few big-name performers did not appear on AFRS. Being headquartered in Hollywood helped Armed Forces Radio in obtaining talent, but the biggest boost came from the industry's top agents.
These were people who had come into the service from the industry. And you really needed knowledgeable people like that to gather the talent. And so we had unlimited talent for programs in the early years. And, well, they did put together a marvelous group of talent. They had programs such as Command Performance, GI Journal, Mail Call, and lots of talent. Bob Hope. Well, you just name all the Hollywood talent. They came and performed.
So for about 3.5 years, Armed Forces Radio provided a morale boost and accurate information to U.S. troops fighting around the world. However, after the war, there was talk of having AFRS sign off the air permanently. In just a moment, we'll learn why that did not happen and why AFRS had to change its name.
Hello there. I'm Don Knotts, and I set this so I'd be wide awake to tell you all about absentee voting.
The fall of 1945 signaled the end to the fighting in World War II and was almost the curtain call for the Armed Forces Radio service. The war was over, and to some concerned, so was the mission of Armed Forces Radio. Fortunately, command officers at the Pentagon saw a continued need for the service in areas occupied by U.S. troops.
It became quite apparent that the mission of AFRTS, the bringing of news, the bringing of a piece of home to people in remote areas was absolutely essential.
Harris has worked with the system since 1948 and knows how important an American broadcasting service is to overseas troops. With the morale factor of American servicemen and women still a high priority, Armed Forces Radio is still alive and kicking.
This is Joe Rowling getting into it Monday, and let's get into it with a lot of luck. And trust me, this is from Ryan Cooter. Get your rhythm, Armed Forces Radio.
Joe Riling is one of about 20 radio personalities who record daily or weekly shows for Armed Forces Radio. Joe does 5 shows a week and realizes the importance of what he does through audience feedback, often from vets who have heard his program overseas.
It's really the neatest thing that's going on. So when somebody comes back from Iceland or from the ADAX or from Korea, from the DMZ or anywhere, you know, it really is kind of neat to have somebody come in and say, hey, you know, listen, man, I listened to your show and really enjoy it. And believe it or not, again, it sounds stupid. That sounds kind of heartwarming, but it really is neat to have somebody say that, much more than somebody who has listened to me over the years at different stations here in L.A. And that's the most fun about it, because you know that these guys, these people, are really into it because it means a lot to them.
A veteran who can relate firsthand to what Joe says is the producer for the Joe Riling Show. Now a civilian, Tim Maddox was a broadcaster for the Far East Network while in the Air Force.
I think we're a very useful service, and I think we do provide that link, and especially to the remote areas. It might not apply so much to people that are stationed like Europe and or Tokyo or in the large metropolitan areas where there's a lot to do. But to the people that are more in the remote areas, like you were in Keflavik, I believe you said, and that's pretty remote. Alaska, pretty remote. And it just links you back with reality. It brings you back home a little bit.
Radio has been, and still is, the cornerstone of this broadcasting service. But it's had to make room for a relatively new and powerful medium, television. It was in 1959 that AFRS incorporated television into its system, thus becoming the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service. The first television came to overseas military personnel in the form of kinescopes, the filming of TV programs directly off the air. AFRTS has come a long way since 1959. Some of the biggest changes have come in technology.
Better quality, going from the days of black and white television to color television to videotape. And then, as you look behind us, the field of satellite technology, which has made a quantum leap in the service to the AFRTS audience overseas. We decided that we were talking to a media generation, a radio and television generation. They got most of their information from radio and TV, most of their entertainment from radio and TV. So we needed to find a way to provide real-time television.
In 1982, that real-time television became a reality on AFRTS. Today, most bases around the world receive much of their TV programming by satellite. However, before TV programs can be put on the satellite, AFRTS must first acquire them.
The process of getting the program for SatNet begins long before it gets to me, in that we first have to obtain clearance for the programs. AFRTS produces none of its own programs. All of our programs come from outside sources, the major radio television networks.
In fiscal 1987, AFRTS had a total operating budget of about $27.5 million. It's estimated, though, that if AFRTS had to pay fair market price for the program material it uses, that alone in TV would be about $120 million. So obviously, AFRTS is grateful to the industry.
The networks and the program owners have been extremely good to AFRTS over the years. They have given us many of their programs at no charge, and thus we have been able to provide the top network programming that's available in the United States.
We have been lucky in the past several years of presenting at least 90% and sometimes more than that. Not as all at one time, you understand, but during the year we get access to all those top shows and television movies.
AFRTS may get the cream of the crop of network and Hollywood television shows, but as Director of Programming, Fry knows well the #1 problem in scheduling programs for a worldwide audience.
It's hard to do when you've only got, in most areas, one channel, one television channel, one AM radio station and one FM radio station. And you can only go 24 hours a day because we haven't figured out how to stretch the day yet.
But you know, the Super Bowl will hit New Zealand at 10 in the morning and hit Germany at 3 in the morning. And it's very strange. That's why shows like The Tonight Show might show up in the morning in some areas. And we have stations in almost every one of those time zones.
Whether it be television or radio programming, timely news and information rank first. The task of keeping overseas troops abreast of national and world events has not changed in over 45 years.
Now, we do not create news. We're not a news gathering organization. We're a news disseminating organization. So the people who listen and watch AFRTS overseas probably are better informed than the average person here, who tend to get on one station and listen to it all the time.
I'm Sandy Kozel, AP Network News.
Coming into this room alone, we have Q channels and audio channels from NBC, ABC, CBS, National Public Radio, Mutual, CNN, United Press International, Associated Press, and it goes on and on. So we really have everything right at our fingertips. Now, in the event of a national or international emergency or something that's acutely important to the troops overseas, we are able to respond immediately.
Instantaneous communication with the 1.5 million servicemen and women stationed around the world is another reason the Department of Defense decided to continue the broadcast service following World War II. And just as commercial networks use airtime for advertisements, so does AFRTS. Commercials are not permitted on the system, so all advertisements are removed from radio and TV programs. In their place go information spots directed at military personnel, such as this one from the 1960s.
Hello there. I'm Don Knotts, and I set this so I'd be wide awake to tell you all about absentee voting.
Most current programming is recorded on videotape, so commercials are electronically swapped. However, with live programs, the change must also be done live.
We record the majority of our programming on cartridge tape that we run through a 6-second delay loop system. That's how we are able to decommercialize our programming.
Cher is a former Navy broadcaster who spent some of her military time in Italy, learning broadcasting on the grassroots level.
We were a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour-a-day broadcasting service for all of Italy. We had to bounce from radio in the morning to television in the evening. We were responsible for our DJ shows, newscasts, sportscasts, both on radio and television.
It seems the training received by its broadcasters is as varied as the programs on AFRTS. During the past few minutes, we've looked at the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service and how it reaches out to America's troops overseas. There is another audience occasionally reached by the service, though, and their impressions of the United States are often formed by what they see and hear on AFRTS.
The appreciation of the people that the countries that we've been in. Our people have made such friends with them that Armed Forces Radio and Television is called the best ambassador the U.S. has.
Ella Fitzgerald's Mountain Greenery was the final tune for this session, and this is your platter party host, Army Sergeant Bill Rowland at AFN Berlin, saying bye-bye, bye bonds, and I'll be spinning your way again tomorrow at 17 hours Central European Time.
That's it for this week's edition of For Veterans Only. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed our feature report on the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service, a report I very much enjoyed doing, having been an AFRTS broadcaster while I was in the service. And along those lines, a very special hello to this week to those who are viewing in Keflavik, Iceland, my overseas base while I was in the Air Force. And also in closing tonight, I would like to remind all viewers who at any time have been stationed overseas and may have pictures or other memorabilia of AFRTS that the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service is beginning to compile and accumulate memorabilia, information on AFRTS for their archives. And I'm sure they would be more than happy to hear from you if you have something you would like to donate to those archives. You can contact the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service in Sun Valley, California. It's in Los Angeles County. I'm sure they would be more than happy to hear from you. So until next week, for Jim Clay, I'm Ray Keeton, and this is For Veterans Only. See you next week.
Thanks from America to all our men in blue, our boys in khaki too, our tough Marines, our Coast Guard, our Army nurses true. We thank you so much. Fellas, this doesn't rhyme, but one of these days soon we'll be seeing you. And meantime, this is Bob Hope thanking you for those letters to Command Performance, Armed Forces Radio, Los Angeles, USA. Speaking for everybody on Command Performance and saying the best of the best in the USA. So long.
She's on her way, men. From us to you, every week till it's over there.